I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do.
So, I have a confession to make today. It seems that my past has caught up with me. Just a little bit ago, I was sent a package in the mail, and it was a manila envelope. And when I opened it up, all that was in there was a DVD. And when I took a look at the DVD, I was like, who sent this? I turned it around, took a look at the envelope itself, and I saw the name Jeff Nash. Now, Jeff Nash is an old friend of mine. I haven't spoken to Jeff directly outside of, say, Facebook and things like that for about 30 years since I moved away from Connecticut. And I saw that he was still in Connecticut. The return address was there. And so I got this DVD. And what the DVD was a copy of a movie that I made with Jeff and several of my friends in the summer of 1992 and finally finished and quote-unquote broadcast it in 1993. The name of the movie is Let's Get Dead, and it was shot in Willimantic, Connecticut. And in the summer of 1992, Jeff Nash and several of my friends invaded a public access channel and made a movie. Now, I knew Jeff and several of the people who were going to be actors in this film from my time at a video store. I was at Video Visions in Storrs, Connecticut, a nearby town, which is actually a college town. It's where the University of Connecticut is. And the people who are in the movie are folks that worked at that video store, such as Jeff Nash. And some of the people who were there were Sarah Kovarovics. This was the daughter of the owners of the Video Vision store. Cameron Erth was a friend. I don't think he actually worked there. Then there was Dan Truman, who ended up working there. He was a friend that ended up being an actor, and he was really going towards an acting career at the time that I was trying to come up with something to do, something exciting to do. And what I did is I guess 1991, I want to say, I ended up going to the public access channel that was in Willimantic, Connecticut, and the director there was Jim Diaz. Jim Diaz was a great guy. And one of the things that I think is kind of lost today, I don't know if there are public access stations anymore, but they used to be. They were connected with cable companies, and it was a public service kind of deal. The license that you ended up getting for cable companies, you had to have something for the community, at least in Connecticut. And so there was a open door policy to coming in and learning how to use the equipment to be able to put on a public access show. It was the town crier, essentially. It was the town square where anybody could get up and basically speak their mind. And you could do that in whatever way. And most of the things that were on public access ended up being church hour, where people would have reverends on and they would talk about the sins of the world. And the next hour would be the Satanist hour, where two Satanists or atheists would get up and start talking about the other show. There were many things that were somewhat artistic, but they were kind of public domain pieces. So there was always a need for something to be on during their operating hours. And most of it was being done by locals. I got in there and I just wanted to make movies. And so I ended up throwing myself in as a volunteer, learning every part of what the production was going to be like, at least on video and for broadcast, quote unquote broadcast TV. But of course, when you're dealing with something that's public access, the rules are a little bit more elastic because, let's face it, not that many people are watching. There are not sponsors to worry about. So this was a great learning ground for me to be able to spend a lot of time learning how to listen to what a director's saying, learning what camera angles could be used, that learning headroom, something as simple as headroom, and then learning how to record. So I ended up spending time and trying to be as proficient as possible. And what that allowed me to do was befriend James Diaz. And Jim started to take me on commercial shoots. So one of the things that he did to make money for the cable company and all of that stuff, and to make the public access channel viable, is he would go out and shoot commercials for the local community. So we went to a car wash and we did live shots. And so I learned how to use the Nagra, and I learned how to use monitors and set those up, and how to do blue gunning and white balance and grayscale. All those things I started to learn free of charge, quite honestly. And this was after I got out of the military. So I'm getting this amazing opportunity. And the entire time I'm trying to figure out, what can I make? I want to be able to do this. This would be great to make a movie. So after cutting my teeth, I realized I did not want to work in James Diaz's place, because I saw what hell he went through. He was a creative guy, but he was a business guy. He had to be a business guy. And I would see him just, dying creatively when he'd go to the car washes or to the diners. And they would say things like, get all these shots. You can shoot whatever you want, but make sure that you get the rotating pie container. They'd have like this rotating pie display, and they thought the world of this pie display. And so when I was watching him edit together stuff for this diner, he's there with the guy who's paying for it, the owner of the diner, and the guy's going, "Where's the pie? Where's the pie rotisserie? Where is it?" And he's like, "Well, we're doing this dynamic editing. We're showing how much fun this place can be." He goes, "I want the pies in there." So it's a slow rotating diorama with pies on it. Right. So there's bam, 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 this Scorsese style editing. Boom, 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 boom. The place is full of energy. Pies. Slow motion pies. And then there's more editing. And I could see him die when he was having to do these kind of things. And he told me, whatever you do, just try to be as creative as you can. To his credit, he was up for me being creative. So I got all these friends together and I came up with a story and I proposed an idea. Now, working in the system of public access, I couldn't have nudity. I couldn't have extreme amounts of profanity, but I could have subversive ideas. As long as I kept it somewhat clean, I could do something that could be relatively interesting. So I came up with this idea for a movie called Let's Get Dead. And it was a rags to riches story about a happy-go-lucky teen named Tom Shrink who makes his childhood dreams of fame come true. Now, the problem is, the twist of the film is that he wanted to be a murderer and he wanted to live in infamy after he had seen a local murderer go from being the town idiot that everyone made fun of to being someone that was scary and they were always looking back at. And that made such an impact on Tom Shrink that he wanted to try and do that. But he wanted to be better than the originator of the idea. He wanted to go nationwide. So he wanted to be quite infamous. And so, of course, this is a satire. And this was in 1992, I typed this thing out. So the satire was about celebrity culture, the obsession that was happening. It was just starting to really bloom. We shot it in a way that was a mockery of the A&E biographies of the time, or Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. There were these shows that were essentially congratulatory travelogues for rich people, puff pieces that were going around. And there was also an onslaught of true crime. Really, the true crime thing starts in that time period, using their moral outrage to hide the fact that they were insanely curious about the sort of details around serial killers, essentially. There were a lot of crazy things that were happening, like David Koresh and the Waco, Texas debacle. Things like that were happening. The Satanic Panic was happening. All of these things were really hysteria parties. People really relishing. They're getting this little thrill behind the scenes around things that allegedly were outraging them. So that was the kind of thing that I was going for Let's Get Dead. And I mean, at this point, 2023, this ship has sailed, right? We certainly know that this is a problem. It's already gone postmodern. There's a meta version of this this kind of thing. Let's talk a little bit about the 30 years that have passed. It's now the 30th anniversary of Let's Get Dead. So I finally watched it again. I had not watched it in a long time. I didn't have a copy of it. I had the master copies. Everything was on 3/4 inch VHS or 3/4 inch tape. And then there were VHS copies, which is 1/2 inch. So I had pristine versions of those, but I don't have a VCR or anything like that anymore. So it took Jeff Nash getting in touch with me and giving me a copy of this by DVD for me to watch it. And it took months before I wanted to watch it because I wasn't sure what I thought about the movie. I really was proud of it when I first came out with the idea. It was what it was. It was shot on video, and so it has all of those things where all you're doing is basically using your friends, whatever locations there are. If you want to find out what your production values are, you stand up, you look to the left, you look to the right, you look down, you look up, you look at the front, and you look in the back, and anything that's there in your eyesight, you write that down on a piece of paper, and that's your new props. If somebody has a new car, you're going to use that. If somebody has a picture of Teddy Roosevelt, suddenly Teddy Roosevelt's going to be in your movie, a picture of it. All of that stuff was there. And there was a certain love, the freedom of that. And it was wonderful to make something. I used to joke about it, though, that it was a 40-minute short film that was 20 minutes too long. And to a certain degree, I still believe that what I could do with editing these days, and what I could do with being able to use something more than video tape. I had to take all of the sound and all of the music that I was using and put that to VHS and then just roll that into the A/B roll that was available to me at that time. A very, very primitive video editing system that I was able to work on. But it was a semi-pro to pro editing system that I did not have the possibilities of having before I started working with the public access channel. So, that was great. I had these friends, Dan Truman, Jeff Nash, Sarah Kovarovics, Cameron Earth, a bunch of other friends all got together and said, sure, we'd be happy to do this. It was 1993 when it showed. In 1994, Natural Born Killers comes out and kind of takes that idea and really makes it huge. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. John Waters beat us all to the punch back in 74 with Female Trouble. But I didn't necessarily talk about Let's Get Dead that much. I know they enjoyed it. And one of the things that I realize now is I need to champion the movie a little bit more because everybody else is pretty proud of it. It was this really strange thing to do for a summer that most people don't get to do. And it's something that I think makes shot on video so much fun. It's also why shot on video gets hated on as much as it does. I believe these days, shot on video no longer has this terrible black mark on it that it had back in 1993, and certainly older times than that. I think because of the explosion of YouTube and the explosion of TikTok, that the idea of what shot on video looks like, all of those things have changed the expectation levels of cinema, the idea of the image that we're taking a look at. I remember when I was starting to do this podcast, there was a moment where I wanted to do YouTube videos, and I did do them. And I fretted over getting the lighting right and all this stuff, and people were like, it's taking you so long to do these things. I'm going crazy. And my friend said, have you watched any of the YouTube videos? And he said, just watch some YouTube videos, just indiscriminately grab things. And there are some things that look very nice and polished, but it's also the idea that you can go on there and just have the microphone dangling out of your earbuds against your T-shirt and have in the background posters from your bedroom and have no worries about it. It may be white balanced, it may not be, and that doesn't matter. And so because that has become so familiar to us, I think it has really helped shot on video get some respect. It's not seen as this oddity anymore. Shot on video was considered trash, quite honestly. It was hillbilly trash. And that was the snobbery, the stigma that was put there by people who love film and people who make films. I love film too, but I couldn't make films. And so how bad was the disdain for shot on video? There was actually a movie that was made in 1987 with Kathleen Turner, big budget movie called Julia and Julia. It was the first major motion picture that was shot on Sony HDVS cameras, so high definition for 1987. Who knows what that high def looked at that point. But it was attempting to still look like film, and it didn't matter. The idea that it was not film was really an issue. So there was this level of shame. Now, the great thing is most shot on video people could care less about that shame. I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again, that I believe that horror movies are the punk rock of cinema. And shot-on-video movies are one reason that I can really consider horror the punk rock of cinema. Now, obviously, there's no doubt. I'm a big heavy metal fan, right? I love heavy metal, and I know that there's people out there that are going, fuck calling it punk. It's metal. Metal and horror are completely synonymous with each other. And I will say that, obviously, horror's gothic influence. It's all over heavy metal. Plenty of bands certainly go right down that path of making horrific music, use horror movies as titles, even titles of their bands. I mean, Black Sabbath, for God's sake, that's pretty obvious. But let's be serious. Heavy metal just doesn't corner the market on the world of horror. In fact, far from it. Punk rock and rap, for the longest time, love to scare the shit out of the status quo as well. There's someone like the Cramps or the Ghetto Boys for every Black Sabbath that's out there. And for every Alice Cooper, there's a Misfits, there's an Insane Clown Posse. And the thing is, we can argue about this stuff all we want, about, oh, is it punk, is it metal, whatever. It's kind of a pointless argument, because all of them kneel at the altar of Screaming Jay Hawkins. You know, each musical genre preaches rebellion, but Screaming Jay Hawkins is the first horror guy, quite honestly. So it's always about a fuck you to authority, right? And authority is usually what makes punk rock and things like that happen. I mean, we're talking about, if we look at why I think horror is the punk rock of cinema, it's really about the energy. It's really about a mentality that's there. But most importantly, it's a grassroots spirit and how it relates to its audience. So many times with horror movies, the people who make the horror movies are the fans that came after the first guys who were making horror movies. Yeah, sure, some of the big guys never wanted to make horror movies. They just did it to make some money. Sure, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the bands that were big, like I mentioned the Cramps, there's the Ramones. They both wanted to be the biggest bands in the world. They're playing the kind of music that they played, but they thought, logically, of course we're going to be the biggest things. The Ramones thought they were the Beach Boys. And so, yeah, there's nothing about ambition, no problems about ambition. But what I think is how it relates to its audience. That so many of the people who are horror fans watched the horror movies and then wanted to make horror movies themselves, and it was somehow somewhat accessible to be able to do that. There's no velvet rope separating the audience from the creators. They're very DIY. They're interested in that direct connection with the audience. And, you know, making a horror movie or starting a punk band is pretty much accessible to anyone in the audience. You got the guts. You got the audacity. You can get up on the stage. You can get behind the camera. You can ask people to do crazy things for you. You can run away from the police every time and carry the camera with you. There is a place for you in punk, and there is a place for you in horror. Most things that are going to be super ultra low budget are probably going to be horror is because most people want to be in a horror movie. I had these people who had never acted before. The only person who had acted was Dan Truman. So, of course, he's my lead in the movie, and he's just fantastic. If there's anything that is memorable about the movie, if anything saves it from me, that would be Dan Truman and his performance. Everybody else is just trying. But everybody is more than happy to pretend that they just puked on somebody, but it's really just food coloring with creamed corn. Everybody wants to be chased with a knife in a movie. Everybody wants to maybe die. There's something very seriously fun and playful about making horror movies. It's so interesting to me and so much fun for me that everybody comes with a sense of play. So we had a great time, even though it was a really hot summer, 100-degree days, ridiculous. We're shooting in place because we didn't have a lot of bounce cars or anything. So we're shooting with a lot of direct sunlight. So we're not under trees and stuff. We're broiling. There's no money whatsoever. I just want to make sure that it doesn't inconvenience my cast or a crew before they quit. I want to make sure that they are feeling that this isn't going to cost them a dime outside of some sweat equity of hours. So pizza, stuff like that. I grabbed whatever I could, old TV sets, everything, and we just used those as props, and we came up with this crazy idea and walked around it. All of this comes to this idea of horror being the punk rock of cinema. So you may be asking yourself, after listening to this for, my goodness, a full 20 minutes, why in the hell am I talking about this? Why did this suddenly come up? And it's interesting. It's because, first off, a friend sent me a copy of the movie and made me kind of face that I hadn't really looked at that film for 30 years. But it's also that I've been going down this rabbit hole of shot on video films. If you follow me at all on any of the social medias, you probably know that I had a little bit of a tumble while I was out hiking. I do a lot of hiking in the Oakland Hills in the Bay Area, and I took a spill, and I was alone, and it was this whole little thing. But anyway, I ended up really messing up my knee and a little bit of my back. My back's feeling better now, but the knee really has put me to where I have been watching a lot of movies, and so of course I'm watching Misery and, well, okay, maybe not Misery, but a bunch of movies. And what I ended up doing was going down this rabbit hole. I decided to watch my film, and then I said, it's been a long time since I've looked at shot on video films. And so I decided to go into that spot and take a look, and I found this treasure trove. And so I wanted to see about sharing that. Now, with that, I will say there were a lot of movies that I watched. So this is going to be more than one part. And I'm going to see about getting as much jam-packed in here as I can before we go to part 2. So anyway, let's give it a little bit of an overview of the history of fuck you can't tell me what to do in cinema. So back in the day, and I've covered this in earlier podcasts, but back in the day, you had the 5 major studios, and they pretty much ruled the roost. They made all of the Hollywood films, of course. They made all of the films, really. How did they make it so that they were making all the movies? Well, they own movie theaters, and so they created their own monopoly. And so many filmmakers were kind of locked out. If they were not in the studio system, if they did not beg the favors of the studio system, they were shit out of luck. And there was also at that time, things were getting a little bit out of hand in the world of Hollywood. There were a few scandals or a few murders. There were all sorts of things that had happened that started to sour the American public on Hollywood itself. And so overnight, essentially, a self-censorship that happened with the studios. And so all of a sudden, whatever sordid stuff people were able to get in Hollywood movies, they couldn't get it anymore. And people wanted what they wanted. They wanted to have fun. They wanted to see things that they're not supposed to see. And that's when we had the 40 Thieves, these 40 producers and filmmakers, barnstormers like David F. Friedman and Dwayne Esper and Kroger Babb, S.S. Millard. They basically self-produced and self-distributed their movies, and they started the roadshow style exploitation circuit tour. So they would take tents and they would have these huge signs, and they'd be at the edge of town, or they'd find a theater that was going under, and they'd say, hey, we'd like to rent this place, and we're going to show this movie over the weekend. Could only show it over the weekend because once the police found out that they were going to be there, they were going to have to make a hasty retreat. And it reminds me of the punk movement when it leaves just New York City. So once the second wave starts, which happens pretty much in the West Coast and then moves across the country because of two bands, DOA that comes out of Vancouver and Black Flag out of Hermosa Beach down in LA. And those two bands become touring bands, and they're the first ones really in the punk circuit that decide, we've played these places, we've been banned from all these places, we've got to go on the road. So the leaders of both of those bands, Joey Shithead from DOA and I believe it was Greg Ginn, they started a phone list. And in that phone list, there were credit card numbers and things like that that were stolen that people could use. It was places that you could crash. Hey, there's a friendly person who has a basement and they'll let us sleep there after the show. We just need to do a show in their backyard. Blah, blah, blah. This kind of happened. But what I'm getting at on this is that the touring road show, everywhere that people like Kroger Babb and Dwayne Esper went, filmmakers started to sprout up in those areas. And the same thing happened with Black Flag and DOA. Everywhere that Black Flag and DOA went, they left a trail of people who started their own bands. There may have only been 8 people at any of the shows that they did, but out of those 8 people, probably 5 of them started their own bands. And before you know it, it started to go everywhere. So you have very regional filmmaking that comes out of this totalitarianism of Hollywood. You have people who are coming out of very small rural areas across the country. And I think that's what David F. Friedman used to say when it was just a bunch of country boys going out and making trouble. Everywhere that Dwayne Esper and David F. Friedman went, you would have these filmmakers show up making regional films in studios in their own backyard on no money whatsoever, and then playing the drive-in circuits or the grindhouse circuits, which is essentially 42nd Street and its ilk in other cities. So you had guys like William Graffet in Florida who made movies like Mako, The Jaws of Death, or Stanley, the rattlesnake killing movie. There's people like Larry Buchanan in Texas who comes up with Mars Needs Women and The Eye Creatures. And then there's Bill Rebane, who is in Wisconsin. One of my favorites, still kind of creeps me out a little bit, is The Giant Spider Invasion. There's Long Islander Andy Milligan, who made an entire body of work basically on the land in his Staten Island house. Movies like the ghastly ones. There's Martin Folsa, who is in Louisiana, who did a movie called Terror in the Swamp. There's J.R. Bookwalter in Ohio, who did The Dead Next Door. There's Leif Jonker in Kansas, who did Darkness, which is just an amazing shot on video film. And then there's the godfather of the gore himself, Herschel Gordon Lewis, who was in Florida, Blood Feast, 2000 Maniacs, movies like that. Now, most of those guys are before the true shot-to-video time period. They're guys that were shooting on 16 millimeter, and then they were blowing it up to 35. They were the inspiration for the next generation. See, it's all these guys who are kicking down doors and doing things a little bit off of the norm, getting into trouble, being very punk rock, giving no shits, and their last fuck is burnt somewhere in the backyard. Those guys give birth to the next generation. So I mentioned Leif Jonker, and he's one of the people who I think is really, if you're going to do shot on video stuff, you're going to talk about it. There are certain movies that I think are kind of seminal. Those are the ones that, if you were doing a 101 class on shot on video, these are the movies that you would talk about, the S.O.V. films. So David A. Pryor's Sledgehammer from 1983, that's one that a lot of gorehounds really love. There's Boarding House, directed by John Wintergate. That came out the year before, 1982, and I think that is considered the first full-length S.O.V. horror film. So Julie and Julia was trying to be a major motion picture. It was just being shot on a different format, but it tried its damnedest to look like film. It knew it needed to look like film to be taken seriously. But these are movies that it's like, no, if we wait until we can make a movie that looks like it's a fucking Hollywood film, we'll never make a movie. So it's just like, throw caution to the wind, go with the idea. And so Boarding House would be considered, I think, the first full-length S.O.V. horror film. There may be others, so feel free to reach me if you think I'm wrong. And, of course, Darkness, which I had mentioned before, Leif Jonker, in Wichita, Kansas. He did that in 1993, $5,000 for a vampire apocalypse. If you have not seen this movie, it is well worth watching. It's fun, fast-paced, it never stops moving. And it's, in a way, kind of adorable. And that's something that I think is really interesting about these S.O.V. films. If you're going to watch these, you have to recognize the realities. These people, all of them, are trying to do more than they possibly can. Their reach definitely has to extend past their grasp. And it is important to try and realize that you have to acknowledge that the effects are going to look like cornflakes painted onto someone's face. The blood is obviously in a tube shooting out. The small model that is set on fire from an HO scale house from a train set is supposed to look like a mansion that's on fire. That's part of what I would consider the flavor and the joy of these things. It's also kind of the punk rock thing. If these bands waited to learn how to tune their guitars correctly, there may not have been a movement, but there was something that everybody gravitated to, because it didn't have to be refined. That's the thing about heavy metal. It was really, you must be an expert at your instrument. Be an expert at yours, faster, harder, more ornate. I love that stuff. But the thing is that is a separation from the audience. Look at me. Look how great I am. Look how high the stage is. You can't get up on this stage. There's roadies that will kick your fucking ass if you get past the security guards. We are up here. This is Mount Olympus. There's none of that when you deal with punk, and there's none of that when you're dealing with S.O.V. It is the idea of, can we all play a little bit of pretend? And so the thing that pushes and fuels these things is the energy, the audacity, the love that's behind them, the passion. The idea that these guys are trying the absolute craziest thing, that they are just shooting for the moon. And that is what excites me about these. They're going to do something that's going to be personal, and there's going to be something that's really weird. There's going to be something that is going to be worth watching. And, Darkness, it's a vampire apocalypse. They're like shutting down, quote unquote, shutting down freeways. Ha ha ha, I'm sure. Shutting down bridges. Ha ha, I'm sure. All of this is stolen, right? We know that it's stolen. And it's just a bunch of people that they get fake blood on them. But he's doing this on $5,000, right? Now, you can either look at it as, all of its flaws, or you can realize just how friggin' cool that is. And what's funny about Darkness is I feel a little bit like Justin Cronin, the author, saw that film and he borrowed it for his novel, The Passage. There is another one, but I've talked about this one in an earlier show, and I believe I talked about Darkness as well in an earlier show, which was about making movies on micro budgets. And this movie is SHATTER. It's from 1994. This is one that I tell people they really should watch as well, because SHATTER was like shot over the course of 5 weekends. It was in Middletown, New York, which is like very small town. It looks like a small town. The total budget for it was somewhere between $3,500 and $4,000. The reason that it was shot on Betacam was because Scooter McCrae, who's the director, worked at a video facility. So he was able to get a deal with that. And so, with a low budget like that, what are you going to do, right? Well, why not take on the apocalypse, where Armageddon is a place where nobody gets the luxury of dying? Let there be angels that are fucking women and causing antichrists. Let's have all of that stuff while you're doing that essentially in someone's bedroom. So that's the kind of thing that I think is a lot of fun. And this is the kind of thing that you can talk friends into. Most of us don't have friends who are going to be good, strong, solid actors, right? So it's a lot easier to get them, to talk them into running around screaming with blood and Alka-Seltzers in their mouth spewing than it is to say, would you be happy to just sit here and contemplate aging? Or divorce. Let's talk about divorce. Would you like to be in a film where we can talk about divorce? Your friends are just not going to want to do that. That's a real commitment. That's some heavy energy, and you really don't want to be a bad actor trying to do that kind of thing. So anyway, enough about Shattered. What I wanted to do is have that be an entrance into some of the S.O.V films that I've been looking at recently. You're going to see something personal when you're watching these. You're going to see maybe not what the artist wants you to see, but what comes out, because that's just how things work when you're trying to make these things. So without any further ado, I do want to continue with Scooter McCrae, writer-director Scooter McCrae, who did Shattered. His follow-up was 16 Tongues. I think he shot it in 1999, and there may have been reshoots and stuff, but it did not get released until 2005. So it was a while from the time of Shattered. Almost, it was a decade until someone saw another work by Scooter McCrae. And this time, big budget, he had like $10,000. So in this, he decided to take on cyberpunk. Of course, why not? And pornography. And he put those two things together into 16 Tongues, which is a movie really about a culture and a society that is stimulating itself to death. There's so much stimulation, there's so much self-gratification that everybody is somewhat immobilized by it. And they're slowly atrophying spiritually as well as physically. And so most of this movie takes place in one location, which I'm assuming was a hotel, and it might have been a hotel hallway and a couple hotel rooms, or it may be someone's house and they just put an ice machine at the end of the hall. Whatever it might be, it feels like part of this is shot in a hotel, not a very good one, let's put it that way. And I know part of it was also shot, I believe it was in a kink or fetish dungeon in New York City that they had an inn for, and they used that for prison cells and things like that. But most of the movie takes place in this hotel setting, and in the movie it's a Sappho hotel. It's called the Sappho Hotel, and it essentially houses people that are trying to hide from the world. There are people on the run. There are people who have a checkered past. There are people who are waiting there to die, or there are people who are just trying to fuck themselves to death. Whatever it is, this is a dark, dark place. This isn't something that you want to go to. It is people on the run. It's kind of like, I consider it like William Friedkin's Jungle Village in Sorcerer. It's like that village if Sorcerer was shot in a Motel 6. The world of this hotel is just wall-to-wall porn. I'm not kidding about wall-to-wall porn. This movie has so much nudity, graphic, explicit nudity in it, but there's no graphic, explicit sex. There's simulated sex. There's sex with prosthetics, a blowjob with prosthetics. But the truth of the matter is, this is literally the set dressing in the Sappho Hotel. The walls are covered with spread body part shots. And there are commercials that are running all the time telling you to fuck this ass or fuck this pussy and all this strange stuff. There's moaning and groaning on the airwaves there. I don't know if it's on a speaker system or if it's just the TVs don't turn off. But it is a very interesting thing that in this world of wall-to-wall porn, the desensitization is that It's almost like he didn't know at the time, Scooter McCrae, when he was making this, that we were going to have a world of Amazon algorithms and X and Twitter algorithms, that everything that we say that we like, suddenly we are inundated nonstop with commercials about that. That's essentially what's happening in this movie, 16 Tongues. You have a world where you are avalanched by what you think you like, to where you no longer care to know anything about it. So people actually, instead of having to pay for porn, you actually pay to not have porn in your room so that you can finally sleep, so that the images can finally stop. You can't do anything about the wallpaper, which is literally dicks and pussies, but literally pictures, not literal, like fleshy organs. They don't have the money for that. There was no budget for that kind of thing. It's just Photoshop pictures, I believe, that are wallpaper. But the televisions, to turn them off, it costs you money. You have to pay to turn off your porn. While you have this crazy thing of where you are inundated by porn that for not 1 second of the film, I think, is there any titillation whatsoever. It's kind of funny to see reviews that are done by people online about 16 Tongues, and they're like, I like nudity and stuff like everybody else, like the next guy, but this was really oppressive and it wasn't fun. And yeah, I don't think Scooter McCrae was trying to give you fun. He was going to give you nudity. He was going to give you some form of a attempt at titillation, but the idea really isn't to titillate. It's to make you feel the hopelessness and the anesthetization that would happen being surrounded by that much. So who is living in 16 Tongues? Who are the characters? What makes this movie interesting? So these main characters are in that kind of world, and they're all damned souls. These are bad guys. And these are people that might be past redemption. So an interesting thing that you would not normally get in a Hollywood film is Scooter McCrae gives us characters who may not find a redemptive end. And they may be too ugly or brutal or evil to really root for. I think he really takes some serious chances. The main character is named Adrian Torque. He's a police officer. And when we first meet this police officer, he's gone to a jail cell. He's opened it up. There's a prisoner in there who's dressed in leather fetish gear, completely head to toe, basically as a slave. And he first orally rapes the person, and it's a man. He orally rapes the guy. And then after he orally rapes the guy and the guy is gagging, he decides it's time to shoot him and kill him. So he just shoots him in the head and walks away. That's our main character. And so you're like, wow, what am I supposed to get out of this? Now, more about Adrian Torque is that he's horribly scarred. He's a police officer who was scarred in a terrorist bombing. And at one point he says something about justice, that justice is delicate. But the people who enforce justice cannot afford to be delicate. So he kind of says that that's why he is as evil as he is. He justifies it. But I think a lot of his actions come from nearly dying in this terrorist bombing. His face has been reconstructed. And here's where we just get this weird fucking shit in this movie. His face is reconstructed from the tongue meat, I guess, of 16 of the bombing victims that died around him. Those grafts have been put on his face, and they contain, almost like the phantom limb or like the hands of Orlok, they contain some of the memory of the people who were there before. And it's all the PTSD, it's all of the terror and the anxiety and the angst and the horror is inside of these grafts, and they're slowly driving him mad. Other characters that are in this, there's Ginny, who's an assassin, and she is hiding out, but she's been genetically modified by a scientist, and I think that this is a punishment for being a killer. He put clitorises on each eyelid. Bear with me, I did not write this. This is purely Scooter, but it's the idea of she has these clitorises on each eyelid, so every time she blinks, she's sexually stimulated, and that is a way to keep her killing instinct neutralized. Who is going to be dangerous? How can she be prepared? How can she focus when every time she blinks, she's having this sexual stimulation to distract her? So she's living to try and find a way to get past this so that she can go and kill the scientist who did this to her. And then there's Alec, the lesbian girlfriend of Ginny, and she's a hacker who's infiltrating the hotel system. So we learn a little bit more about the system that's going on through Ginny and what she's doing. They're trying to overtake and be the master of the system itself. You know, they say that some people should never meet, and I think that is the tagline for 16 Tongues. And so when these three main characters do connect, everyone in that hotel is in danger. And so this is a movie that is a head trip. It is full of sorrow. It is a crazy mix of humor and horror and social commentary. It's not for everyone, I will say that, but the moments that sing are really strong. There are some interesting and very effective special effects. They're very low res, but at the same point, when you see Ginny's answer to her problem, it's pretty astonishing. And if you want to experience 16 Tongues, there's a great Blu-ray for it from Vinegar Syndrome. And I think you would enjoy the audio commentary. But there's also a short film that is something that came after that from Scooter McCrae called Saint Frankenstein. Well worth seeing. Okay, so the next film I want to talk about is from Long Island, New York. It's by the auteur Nathan Schiff, who started making movies, I believe, at the age of 16. And I think this might be his first film, Weasel Rip My Flesh. And of course, he was inspired with that name from the Frank Zappa album. So what is this movie? It started in 1979, so he shot it in 1979 at the age of 16. And it's pretty ambitious for a movie that he purports cost $400 to make. Most of these guys usually round up or round down, actually. When you're talking about S.O.V, it's usually street cred to say it costs less. So I'm going to assume that Nathan Schiff actually made it for about $1,000. Dad probably put a little bit more in. This is a movie where all the locations are family houses, friends' houses. They messed shit up on moms everywhere. They went to areas that are wetlands. They stole sequences wherever. They used models to stand in for big budget kind of special effects that you would see. And the homegrown effects are, once again, just a lot of fun. I'll be saying that a lot. They're obviously made by a 16-year-old kid. But I have to say, I was really impressed by this movie, how much of a savvy filmmaker Nathan Schiff was at the age of 16. So basically the idea of the movie is that there's a NASA research spacecraft that went to Venus, and I believe it's on its way back, and it crash lands. It goes out of control and crash lands in Long Island and pretty much ends up in the wetlands. And the wetlands, you know them when you see them. Essentially, it's straight out of The Godfather. You're waiting for somebody to drop the gun but leave the cannoli, right? It's in that spot. And so this thing, which is essentially a model rocket that gets lit on fire, lands in Long Island, and it spills toxic waste and radioactive material into the ground there. And of course, what happens? Two teenagers on bikes are going through there, as normal teenagers will, just fucking around, and they find these metal containers with all this weird liquid drooling out of them. And of course, what do? They fuck around with the contents. And so one of the things that they do is they realize that there's a animal den near them. And I can't remember, I think somebody maybe got bit. Some of the particulars are drawing a blank at this point. But I do remember them just pouring this nasty, oozing, glowing stuff, I think it was yellow, into a hole that goes into a den. It's an animal den. Oh my goodness, what animal is in there? Well, guess what one it is? Well, it's a weasel den. You know, as the title says, as you might expect, many people get their flesh ripped by this this weasel that becomes a giant weasel that runs around tearing people's arms off and stuff. And the special effects are here made from whatever was in the pantry, whatever was under the sink, and they just glued that together. But this movie is full of crazy amounts of action and gunfights, and there's secret agents from the government that are coming in to destroy this thing. It's a little bit like the premise of Bad Taste by Peter Jackson. There's this group of people who are coming in with big guns and ready to shoot this thing. And everybody looks like they're related, because they are. And everybody has that Long Island accent. And I'm from the East Coast. I'm from that tri-state area. So I can tell a Long Island accent pretty far away. And it's fun to hear that. It's regional horror. It's something that you would normally not get. There are so many things that are in these movies, and in this particular one, there's a very Long Island feel to the way that the houses are, the way that people dress, the way that everybody has sunglasses, for fuck's sake. It's the sunglass capital of the world, Long Island. So all of this stuff gives a sense of a distinct stew. Back when I was young, I thought all that was a sign of amateurish stuff that you should be ashamed of, that everything should sound like California, or everything should sound like London, or everything should sound like New York. Those are the places where culture is, and the rest of it is like, oh man, you should be embarrassed showing a house that looks like that. Well, not true. Anyway, there's action, there's gunfights, there's these secret agents with the government, and of course, no movie like this would be complete without a mad scientist. And there's a mad scientist who wants to use the monster weasel, and he wants to get the blood from the monster weasel, and he wants to inject it into other weasels and people and all this stuff to create an army of maniacs that are going to go run around and smash stuff. But it is a sign of the kind of movie making that is a lot of fun in the shot to videos. There is this crazy point of view of just kind of having fun. He's 16 years old. He's still talking about distrust of government and stuff like that. But there's also this thing of throw anything at the screen and see if it sticks. So you use anything that you can find. And towards the end of the movie, there is this out of nowhere shark attack. You're going to watch the movie. You're going to want to wait for the shark attack. It's friggin' hilarious. The reason I bring it up is that the shark was not part of the script. The shark was not a prop that they made. The shark was something that was found in a trash can near the set that day, whatever the location was. And they found that shark and they said, you know what, this is a pretty cool looking thing. We're just going to put this in the movie. What I think was great is how much he got about movie making. And sure, the angles and the camera, stuff like that, there's moments where it's a little wonky, the timing's not always great, but some of the shots these are choices, and all of these choices, many of them are really good. And he's also smart in making the effects and the makeup and the props and the costumes only as ornate as they need to be. In other words, you are going to have a giant rabid weasel that's attacking another monster, and they're fighting like they're mini kaiju, and the entire body doesn't need to be this giant weasel. The head has to be, and Nathan decided up to the forearms, up to the elbows should be. Now, sometimes because of overzealous acting, you can see that the arms end at the elbows, and you see like a plaid shirt or something like that on the weasel at that moment. Yeah, it would be great if that wasn't in there, but in a way, it made me admire him even more, that he had the presence of mind not to get bogged down in a costume where he had to have that one big shot. He used a model to be able to get the one big money shot of the weasel. But instead, he just could do half of the body. And he realized, instead of spending his entire budget on something like that, hey, you know what? We just go up to the elbows on this and make sure that the head looks good. And that is great. And I love the idea that is this regional horror movie making. Somewhere along the line, Nathan Schiff saw that this could be done outside of the Hollywood system. And he just decided, I may never get out of Long Island. I may never have the money to be able to do this kind of thing. I may never get to film school. I better do this now. And you know what? I've got a video camera. And, fuck all on this. We're just going to do it. So Nathan Schiff's Weasels Rip My Flesh is a hell of a fun film. It's a real hoot, and it is pretty much the epitome of the spirit of shot-on-video movies. And if you wanted to watch Weasels Rip My Flesh, the DVD, I believe, right now is out of print. It was done by Image Entertainment, part of their cult cinema collection. But you can watch it on YouTube. There's a full version, at least one full version of it out there. I feel okay about saying that because I don't believe that you can get it anywhere else. There may be an opportunity to rent it on Amazon Prime, but I'm not necessarily so sure about that. So another shot-on-video film that I think is a lot of fun that I ended up just watching recently is The Pride of Jupiter, Florida, movie called Killing Spree. Tim Ritter's Killing Spree came out in 1987. And this is just a fun, weird, crazy movie. And the lead actor is named Asbestos Felt. So that gives you an idea of the kind of off-the-wall stuff that's going to happen. And the story is really simple. It's a guy named Tom. He's recently married this woman. They're still kind of in the honeymoon phase. He's a divorcee, so he has had a wife before, and she cheated on him. And he is scarred, a little bit deeper than anybody thinks, scarred over what his first wife did. And then he feels that his new wife is cheating on him. And so he starts getting paranoid, and it does not take long for him to get paranoid. And it doesn't take long for his paranoia to go into something of a deeper action. And he just decides anybody that thinks his wife is cheating on with, he's going to kill. And worse, he finds what he thinks is a diary. It's a little black book. And as he opens it up, he is reading about these sexual trysts that his new wife has had with people like the television repairman, the pizza guy, the lawn mowing guy, the groundskeeper, all of these things that are so obvious. And he decides he's going to go on a killing spree. Now, the killing is way over the top. And it is hilarious, and it is gory. So it is a great mixture. It's one of those movies, many movies have this idea of, the woman is bad and the guy is doing the punishing. And a lot of times you'll hear about the misogyny that there can be in movies. And I will say that in the shot-to-videos, there are folks that make movies that, I think they are misogynistic in their own way. There is an anti-woman thing to them. It's constantly the same fucking thing. That's not happening in Killing Spree. In fact, the thing that makes Killing Spree so much fun is that it's making fun out of this idea of the perfect woman and the perfect husband, the idea of jealousy, getting someone back for this. It's all in this fucking guy's head, right? And so the fun of this movie is watching how out of control this guy is and realize that we're not supposed to, for even a second, relate to him after the initial relation that we have when we first see him reading this thing. Once he goes off the deep end, he just continues to go off the deep end. And this movie revels in making it even more and more ridiculous. And a lot of the humor that's in there, I actually appreciated how well it was written. It's not like Shakespeare or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but the jokes land rather well. The actors are all doing the kind of acting that they can at that level. I thought it was really fun how this could have been a really dark, melodramatic film. You could see this kind of like Combat Shock, the Buddy Giannavazzo film, where that movie is just dour meets another dour thing till you get to the thing that you know is going to happen. And it's an endurance test. It's a cool movie, but it's also an endurance test. This is kind of like every one of those beats is there in this movie, but they're played for laughs and a pretty good amount of gore. The gore effects are actually pretty good for this film. It has a bigger budget than most of the ones that I'm talking about. I have no idea what the actual budget is, but I've seen everything up to $75,000, which is actually a lot of money for a shot-to-video of this type. But I think if it is, it's money well spent. So if you're in the mood for a movie that has death by screwdriver and death from ceiling fan or death by lawnmower, you can do no better than Killing Spree, directed by Tim Ritter. And you can watch this film. You can get the limited edition DVDs. So there's also a Blu-ray available. Now there's a retro 80s edition DVD that's put out by Camp Motion Pictures. And you can also find the Blu-ray. I think there's still some Blu-rays left of Killing Spree from SRS Cinema. So there's two places that you can find Killing Spree, and there may even be more if you just do a little bit of searching. It's well worth your time. What I love about these shot-on-video films, these S.O.Vs, is that you may think that they're all going to be the same thing. That if you had $5,000, the idea is going to be small and economical so that you can get this thing done. You think most of the movies are going to follow a certain template, but the reality is it's kind of like punk rock in the 70s. So you had bands that were like the Ramones, and then you had bands that were a little bit more esoteric, like Television. And then you had bands that were out of their fucking minds, a band like Suicide that would have 10-minute songs with people screaming, and that's it. And the sound do-do-do-do-do-do-do in the background. So all of those were considered part of the punk movement at that time. Every one of them a little bit different than the other. Sometimes super different, where you're like, I don't even see how these are both the same kind of music. And I will say that I can see that in the shot-to-video films as well. SOVs go all over the place in their scope and scale. You know, it's a lot, I don't want to say easier. I want to say that it is more of what your expectations are going to be to have a movie kind of like Weasel Rip My Flesh, or to have a movie like Killing Spree. You know, movies where the visceral is there and the idea is really easy to digest, and it's very populist. It moves at a pretty brisk pace. Then there are some that try to do something a little bit different. That brings me to Brad Sykes' film, The Pact. In 1995, he shot this in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So Brad at the time was going to, I think, Boston University, and he was coming home on the summers to hang out in Virginia Beach. And so he would just come up with ideas with his friends and get his friends together and say, let's make a movie. So there was a series of films that he made in Virginia Beach over a period of years. I'm assuming 4 years for being at BU. And The Pact, I guess, is probably one of the better ones, or one that gets seen the most. And it's completely different from what you would expect in an S.O.V. film with a very small budget. This is a movie that has aspirations to art films, to more of a gothic style, done in Virginia Beach in the modern day with very little money, shot on video. So Brad does this film where he's talking about this woman. Her name is Angie Graves. She inherits her mother's, oceanfront home, and it's like a 19th century oceanfront home. And when we see it, it's just this weather-beaten, kind of paneled house with boarded up windows and stuff. And it's off of the beach, just up on a hill. And it looks kind of interesting, kind of foreboding. In fact, I believe that Brad used to pass this building on his way home from whatever he was doing in Virginia Beach. And this is a part of town that he didn't live in and he normally didn't go to, but some appointment that he had was bringing him back and forth there. Saw that house and he said, I should write a story that has that house, because that we have to be able to use that. It's just sitting there rotting. So this woman is inheriting her grandmother's 19th century oceanfront home, But it comes with a strange past. She meets the weirdest real estate agent ever, who I think is trying not to sell any houses, trying not to have a career. But he's essentially telling her that it's a cursed house. It's been known as the charnel house for the longest time, and it's where all the kids have their urban legends. And it seems, as we watch this movie, that there is a real curse on this house, with a real ghost that is connected to the house, with a real past that comes with it. The ghost is a beautiful woman. And there's also objects that are found inside of this empty house, this abandoned house. And one of them is a mirror. And we find out there's something with this mirror. It's a cursed mirror. So people start to get killed when they enter the charnel house. And Andrea starts getting visits in her dreams from this lovely ghost. And it seems that they know each other. And it seems that there's this past and that there's something unresolved, hence the name The Pact. And there's something in her waking moments, she starts to realize that this may all be real. Now, this is a movie that is not your normal horror film that you would expect someone trying to make for a small amount of money. There's not a lot of blood. There's not a lot of carnage. These are the money makers, right? If you're going to have a $5,000 film, you're probably going to want to have nudity and gore because that's a way to get people to come. But instead, he goes away from that. Brad instead tries to do more of a mood piece. It's an exercise in style, really. It's made with nearly no money. And in a way, his influences, it makes sense because Jean Rollin is one of his influences, someone who made extremely low-budget films with whatever locations were in front of him, with whatever actors he could put together and come up with the story sometimes on the spot. So that is one of the influences that he has. The Pact is this odd American Euro horror. It goes for the gothic ideas. It goes for the romantic ghost story style. Now, there is gore. There is some death that happens, some really weird murders, actually. Something that seems like it's right out of Prince of Darkness, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. There's some gore in there, some blood, but really this is a heavy on the style ghost story shot on S.O.V, which is a lot to ask in a way, because it's hard to create that kind of style. It's hard to create that kind of lighting when you don't have any kind of money to be able to do it. So there's a little bit of Daughters of Darkness in this. So there's like the idea of sexual desires and sexual confusion as kind of supernatural elements of the story. So ghosts might be a stand-in for lesbianism and all of that kind of thing. That's in there. There's a little bit of ghost story, Peter Straub's ghost story, because there's a character in here that's influenced by the ghost. That's kind of like the mediator or the button pusher for the people who are alive. He's kind of like Fenny Bate from the book Ghost Story by Peter Straub. So there's that element that's in there. And then there's the Jean Rollin part. The whole ghost interaction thing feels like Living Dead Girl by Jean Rollin, and the way the locations look, how he puts things together. A lot of shots with two women holding hands in front of the ocean, walking into the ocean. There's the idea of where memory and the past are haunting the present, and that romanticism can be fatal. And I think that's something that you get with a Jean. There's that sorrow of the romanticism that is going to end fatally. So there's that subdued style, and there's a very, shall we say, deliberate pacing in some ways. And that makes it a very unique S.O.V. That's not the kind of way that you would normally go with no money. So I give him a lot of credit. I give where Brad's heart was. I will say that it is easier for non-actors to fight and to run and to be covered in blood and run around naked if so be. It's a little bit harder to get them to emote. And I think the actors were his close friends, and so they're, shall we say, non-traditional. They don't necessarily look like you would expect those characters to look. And I think our lead male character really didn't want to be in the movie. That's, I guess, kind of the way that I would say it. That happens in some of these. I remember Jim Van Bever's Manson Family. Marcelo Grimes, I think, was the name of the actor who played Charles Manson. He did not want to be in it. And it ended up being a movie that was spanned a decade. He had to hang around for a decade doing a movie he hated. So that does happen in these kind of films. But I will say that even with those things that were kind of made it drag a little bit because the actor didn't have the energy that I would be hoping for to carry a somber piece or a stylistic piece, I still will give Brad nothing but high marks for where his heart was, trying to make something completely different and saying, fuck all, I'm going to do it anyway. This is what I want to do, and this is the budget I have, and I have to shoot it on video, and I don't care. It's going to get done. That, to me, is the heart of S.O.V. So there's really good news. If you've been intrigued by the things that I've said about the Pact, it is available on DVD. You can find it. It's, I believe, distributed by Saturn's Core, which is an umbrella company underneath the umbrella of Vinegar Syndrome. So you can go to the Vinegar Syndrome page and find the Pact there. And it's got a nice set of features on it as well. Not only do you get a really nice transfer, there's also a audio commentary by Brad Sykes. And there's also a short film that Brad made as well called Tears. And both of these movies are well worth your time. And speaking of time, it seems that our time for part 1 is up. And I know you're probably going, oh man, can't you just go a little bit longer? But the reality is, for what I want to talk about in S.O.V, we've still got a whopping 10 movies to talk about. So I'm going to save that for the second part. So part 2 will be coming very quickly because, of course, it is Thanksgiving, and my goodness, we should overindulge when it's Thanksgiving. So I am overjoyed to be able to talk about these movies for you. I'm overjoyed to remind you that horror is the punk rock of cinema, and I can't wait until we talk again in just a few days for part 2 of what I'm calling here Death or Glory, the S.O.V movies. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and my Twitter handle is Hellbent Horror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.